No, yeah, like maybe.
Good evening and welcome to the PMI Victorian History Library. Just for interest, the Legislative Council about a week ago passed the rescission of the PMI Act, which we've had since 1899, and which is quite a momentous stage of the life of the History Library. It's all right, we're not going away, we're now incorporated under the Associations Act. I'm Dennis Carrillan, Vice President of PMI, and we're particularly privileged tonight to have Professor Barry Golding with us as our speaker, and we'll very much introduce you properly in a moment. On behalf of everyone, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting tonight, and those of people tuning in online. Our library is located on the lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to elders past and present. Sovereignty has never been ceded, it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. For those who don't know PMI, the facilities are out past where Alan's standing, just round to the right, and the emergency exit if there's an unfortunate situation of something happening, you can go out that door, there's an emergency exit that way, or the way that you came in. So this year's our 170th anniversary. We were established in 1854 and are the second oldest library in Victoria with a collection of over 40,000 items, which is expanding, as you will see outside there. We've got videos now, we're expanding that collection, we're expanding e-collections. And on the table out there, there are books that are related in some way to what Barry will be talking about tonight, that part of Victoria. So if you'd like to look, or if you'd like to borrow any of those books, please feel free to see Helen after the session. We will be videoing this, and it will be on YouTube later on if you want to catch up on anything Barry says tonight, and you can find that through our PMI site. It's now my pleasure, and we're going to pleasure to welcome Professor Barry Golding. Barry was born and has lived all his life in, do you pronounce it Dja or Dja Dja Wurrung country, which is in central Victoria, and has an excellent on-ground knowledge of pre- and post-contact history, landscapes, people, and sites across central Victoria. I understand Barry designed the first Indigenous education course at Federation Uni, which I realised was, I think it started in Lydiard Street as the School of Mines, and I lived in Lydiard Street in my very delicate youth of childhood back in the 1950s. And Barry was instrumental in making that Indigenous education a compulsory part of undergraduate education program. Indigenous Australian perspectives have been included in several of his national research projects, and I looked through your bio and I was astounded at the amount you've written over the years on multiple subjects, and it's well worth having a little look afterwards. Just put Barry's name into Google and you will find a wealth of information and links to some of the work that Barry's been doing. And one of those areas which is quite different to tonight's talk is his involvement in the Men's Shed movement, of which he's been international president, or both and national president. So it's an extraordinary movement. If you know about Men's Shed, has been something which Barry says is we've exported to the rest of the world with well over 1,200 in Australia, and 3,000 around the world. So that's an extraordinary achievement, Barry, for you and for the Men's Shed. Tonight, Barry will be talking about his latest research project turned book about the 6 mountains in the southern Dja Dja Wurrung country. Barry, over to you.
Thank you for the invitation to present, and thanks for participating. We've had an acknowledgement of country. I'll be slightly more specific it was the Unsettling Wurrung people who lived on the head of Fort Phillip Bay, extending from the Werribee River across to Williamstown, Port Melbourne, St Kilda and Paran. So it was on the north end of these are the people who lived here. I was very privileged to pick up a State Library Victoria Fellowship. I pitched an idea to the State Library Victoria, and they said yes. And my office was just behind that door there for the whole of last year. Beautiful little hidey-ho. A mentor librarian, a small amount of money, and the whole year to research and write a book. So I acknowledge that without that support, I wouldn't have done this book. So I said I'll write a book, and that's what I did. And so that was the project. I also acknowledge that Clive Willman is the person who's helped me with this. Clive and I did geology together about 15 years ago, a geology degree, and he was good at mapping and also good at manipulating images. So he's helped with the technical side when I tend to drop away. And also acknowledge I've had huge support from the Dja Dja Wurrung group. Dja Dja Wurrung are the traditional owners, their offices in Bendigo, and Rodney Carter, their CEO, has been really supportive from day one, and he's written the foreword for the book. So they've been right behind this, and I'm really proud to work with them. My intention tonight is basically to introduce you to southern Dja Dja Wurrung country. It's basically the middle of Victoria. If you go north of the Divide, from Bendigo across nearly to Ballarat, from Daylesford to Boort, that's pretty much it. It's a very big area, and I chose 6 mountains in that landscape to write the book about. There's a chapter about each mountain in the book. I'd like to explain how deep time impacts on the environment and First Nations history. As a person who started academically in geology and gravitated to environmental science and then did other stuff, I started from the ground up, and that's the way I think. And I can see that there's a lot to do with the relationship with the rocks and what happens in the landscape. I won't talk about that a lot tonight, but there's a lot of that in the book. Because we've only got a brief time, and please, just who's the timekeeper? Just do that.
No worries.
If I'm running out of time, we'll just say 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. If anyone's got any questions, because I do go fast and sometimes just gloss over stuff, please stop me and say, hey, Barry, because this is small, this is intimate, you can ask questions, no problems. So I'm just going to look at 2 mountains. One is currently called Mount Grishang, which would have been called Gurichang, and Low Gamble, which is Mount Franklin. And I'd like to tease out some of the stories and the legacy themes, and also anticipating the book, which will be launched, as you can read there. And you've seen the information that you circulated with it. So the whole range of things happening in the first week of December. I was born in Donald in northwestern Victoria, and by the time I was 16, I'd mapped 130 Aboriginal oven mounds in the landscape. I didn't really know what I was doing. Farmers said there's what they call abo ovens, and they were big areas of black soil, mounds about half the size of this room, maybe up to half a metre high, with rocks or burnt clay in them where people have been cooking. And as a kid, I was fascinated because there were no Aboriginal people living in the landscape. Nobody ever talked about what these things meant. No one ever talked about anybody living there. This map sits in the Donald History Group Museum today. What I discovered during this project is that of the 130 ovens I mapped as a child, as a teenager in 1960, none of those sites have been recorded. None of those 130. And one of the things that I've emphasised in the book, we talk about Junkin Gorge being bulldozed by CRA or other mining companies, I would estimate that only 20% of the sites that are on Dja Dja Wurrung country have been recorded. And there's lots of significant places that simply aren't on the radar. And that's one of the things that comes out of this project. But I'm interested in all that stuff. I've lived on Dja Dja Wurrung country most of my life. For 44 years I've lived in Kingston, which is a little town near Clunes, between Clunes and Dalesford and Creswick. But I do other stuff which is to do with older adult learning, but I won't talk about that tonight. I'm not going to read everything on the screen. There's lots of words there, but basically I've chosen unsettling as a theme. I will not call the people who came into the landscape settlers. I call them unsettlers. And I call the process that happened unsettlement. And in the book, I look at the formal definition of genocide and come to the conclusion that what happened in our landscape was genocide. And I think it's time to call the spade a spade. And so I will not use the term settling, and I will not use the term settlers for the people who were involved in the genocide. And so that's what I've done. But I haven't just made that call. I've looked very closely at each of these peaks and what happened. And these are all the reasons why I've adopted unsettling as a theme. You can read any of those. But if you really want to do some reading, who's read David Marr's Killing for Country? It's a grueling read, but if you want to be convinced, if you're not convinced about genocide in the Australian landscape, read that one. Or you could read Craig Horn's Line of Blood, Alfred Howard, looking at the history of his forebear, Alfred Howard. Or you could look at David Denborough, who wrote about unsettling Australian histories. And I borrowed the unsettling term in part from David Denborough, although there was a Australian National Gallery exhibition called Unsettling Histories. So other people have used the word, but this is probably the first book that's used unsettling as a theme. So that's what I've done. And I guess the last point is there's a lot to learn about unsettling on country, and that's what. But I'm not just talking about what happened then. I'm actually saying that a lot of this stuff is unsettled now. It still hasn't been unsettled. It's even less settled as a consequence of the failure of the Voice referendum last year. Dja Dja Wurrung country, that's where it is. I use the capital term country, it's a belief system. And for First Nations people, your identity is totally related to country, your own country, where your particular clan comes from. And that's a very strong theme in the book. That's Dja Dja Wurrung country. And as you can read, in the state of Victoria in 2013, there was an agreement, a recognition and settlement agreement, which recognised the Dja Dja Wurrung people as traditional owners. And the areas of green and the hashed areas are the national parks where there's joint management slowly being implemented. There's only a small number of sites where joint management is happening. Just to show you where we are, Melbourne's here, Ballarat, Bendigo. And so I live there. And southern Dja Dja Wurrung country I define as that area there. That's the big picture. There's about over 1 million mountains, named mountains worldwide. There's 21,000 named mountains in Australia, and there's 376 named peaks in Dja Dja Wurrung country. Of those named peaks, 46 are called mountains, the rest are hills. But there's actually more than that. If you want to blow your mind, download off the app called Peak Finder, and you can point this anywhere in the landscape of the world, and it names the mountains on your screen. It's the most amazing piece of software. I think it cost me $8. I think it's free now. It's called Peak Finder. If you remember nothing else, Download the Peak Finder, it's just fantastic. Wherever you go, you just point at the mountains, or you can go to the top of the mountain virtually. I can go to the top of Mount Everest virtually and look around and see what I would see from the top of Mount Everest and name all the peaks. If you take a photograph, the names are on the photograph. It's an astounding piece of software. I only listened to 6 mountains in southern 1/3 of just one First Nation. And there are 440 unique First Nation languages in Australia. So my argument is there's probably 20,000 similar stories remain untold in Australia. So what I'm saying tonight is just a drop in the ocean. Much has been lost, but I think we can learn a lot from listening, learning and renewing. There's the Peak Finder stuff. You can if you want to share this presentation with people afterwards, I don't mind. I got all the peaks from Peak Finder, and Clive helped download them onto a map. That's where they are. So I live there. These are the peaks that I studied. Those 6. But my point is, there's lots of other ones. Only 5% of those peaks have still got the original First Nations name. 5%. There they are, and you can see where we know the names of 5 of them. We don't know the name of Mount Greenock, so I'll refer to Mount Greenock as Mount Greenock. But the other names, I'll use the First Nations names in preference, and that's what I do in the book. When you look closely at that area where the 6 peaks are, and we go right in, it wasn't just the Dja Dja Wurrung people living there, there were 18 clans. And the red numbers are where each clan was. Virtually for each of those peaks, there was a clan that just lived on that mountain. So it wasn't just a whole lot of Dja Dja Wurrung people wandering around an area 200 kilometres long. There were people living on country, and many of the people were living on the other mountains. Anyone who's read Bruce Pascoe will know where this is going. People weren't just nomadically wandering around. They had a home base, and they had a home, and near where I live, there's 30 other mountains in clusters where people were living. There's the 6 peaks. Well, there's bits of the 6 peaks. This is the Mount Franklin crater. This is Mount Crucian, which is 10k north of my place. The one up the top is Mount Greenock. This one, and that one, the top one are all volcanoes, only less than 4 million years old. This one is probably only 110,000 years old, which is very young. The 3 across the middle, Mount Alexander, Mount Tarrangou in the middle with the Aboriginal Rockwell, and Nyanaruk or Mount Beckwith, they're all granite. And the granite mountains are very different to the young basalt mountains. And that comes out in the book, but I can't dig into that deeply. But I can say there's the name, there's the mountains, there's the names, and there's what they're made of. Some of them are really old granite mountains where you couldn't grow a carrot. The other ones are relatively good soil on volcanic soil, surrounded by some of the richest grasslands in southern Australia, and had some of the highest population densities of anywhere in southern Australia as a consequence, because they were rich then, rich now. How did I do it? I've done a lot of bike riding on country. I do a lot of walking. I looked at lots of documents, historical societies. I'm going on the left-hand side. The most useful thing in this project were the Crown Reserve files, which I'll explain a little bit in the next slide. Obviously, Jara, I got a cultural heritage permit and had access to the Aboriginal site register so I could see where everything had been recorded or not. Amazing tool that Clive introduced me to, which is called LiDAR, which is like radar from above, and it undresses the landscape and takes the trees and the water and the buildings away, and all you can see is the ground. And it's just been the most remarkable tool to use. Peak Finder was useful. This one, incredibly useful. People know there's stuff on country, but they won't talk about it. But if you work slowly and develop trust, you get lots of stuff. So what have I done? All those things down that side. And they're the products of this. The top one is the book, which will be released in December. These are the Crown Reserve files. Every little reserve has got a Crown file. So I had dinner in Paran opposite a park. That park would have a Crown Reserve file, which sits in the land manager's office because it's a piece of Crown land. When that reserve was created, there will be a document that says how it was created and anything that happened in that park, whether it be vagrants being picked up, whether murders happened, whether someone wanted to take the soil or someone wanted to cut a tree down, everything is in that file from the year dot up to now. And all you need to do is get access to the file. This is the file from just one of the reserves on one of my peaks.
A reserve is a park,
Reserve is a piece of Crown land. But it could be a national park, it could be a state park, it could be a cemetery, it could be a streamside reserve, it could be a historic reserve, anything that's public land. And they're currently in the process of digitising those. So at some stage they'll become available. They are the most amazing resource. And a lot of my stuff came from the ground files that no one's ever seen. They're tied up with red tape. I wasn't able to get ground files for all of the mountains because sometimes they've gone through, for example, in Malden, the Mount Tarrangou had become the Malden Historic Reserve and they created a new file, but no one knows where the old file is.
Oh.
They're somewhere, maybe, but no one could find them. Maybe when they're digitising them, they'll find them. But that's just to show you the sort of stuff. And as you unwrap this stuff, a piece of paper falls on the floor. These haven't been well looked after. And if I find something in the middle of one of those, it's very hard to get them out because they're all threaded onto. So I use the camera just on the phone. But quite amazing stuff. Bit of geology. There's 3 different sorts of rock in our area and they produce different landscapes. The one down the bottom is the one that I live in. It's a volcanic landscape. It's young, scoria cones, lava plains, very, very fertile country. Then as now. Would have been carpeted with murnion, yam daisy, managed as an Aboriginal grassland and for herbivores. The Rocky Sandstone Hills up the top left, those rocks are 400 million years old. The soils are completely clapped out. You wouldn't grow a carrot in that country. That's the sort of country you get around Castlemaine. Beautiful country, but you wouldn't want to try making a living out of it. And not a lot of herbivores. The granite country, similarly, not very fertile. This is an area that's been cleared where the rock is close to the surface, the soils are sandy, and again, it's not great country. This is my summary. The Rocky Hills, that's the sort of country that's the gold country, around Malden, around Castlemaine, around Maryborough, around Inglewood, around St Arnaud. The granite peaks, They were completely logged during the mining days. And then you've got the fertile volcanic plains. And my very brief summary is wherever you see canola in the landscape where I live, that's where people were living in highest densities. If you see canola, think people. That's what I've come to realise. I could spend a whole night just talking about this map, and I won't, but this summarises it all for me. Here are the 6 peaks. There's 3 different sorts of land that come out when you do a LiDAR image. You've got the brown areas, which are the basalt, with all of the little scoria cones, the volcanoes, the young volcanoes that have pushed through. So I live here, and in my landscape, there's hundreds of volcanoes, all surrounded by fertile volcanic plains, and with creeks that run most of the year. Amazing country to live in. If you live in this other country, very different texture, that's the old rock. People did live there, but it was in much lower population densities. And then you've got the people who are living in the granite country, which is the red area around Mount Alexander, Malvern, that area. Very different. And you'll see the puckered nature of the margin around. That's actually the baked rim that the granite has baked all the way around. See, you go up 20 kilometres and the whole story An Aboriginal protectorate was started there by Edward Parker at Nurramong on the Loddon River. That site has not been recorded. It's not in the history books. You won't find anything about it other than what I've written. No one knows what happened there, even though the records are sitting in the Public Records Office. And no one knows it's there. That's the most beautiful place. And then in 1841, they moved the protectorate to Franklin Ford near Mount Franklin. The history is better known there because a few local historians have scratched around in that. Bain Atwood tells the story of Mount Franklin. Bain Atwood actually does mention Nurramong, I think 3 or 4 pages, but the history really hasn't been told. And so I've told the history of Nurramong in the book simply because it's on the other side of the range near Mount Tarragao. There's the brief history. Dja Dja Wurrung people managed the land across around 2,000 generations. Mitchell came into the landscape in 1836. The squatters came in from 1837. And there were widespread massacres in the landscape until 1843. By 1843, there was no longer need to massacre because most of the people were off country or dead. Most of the massacres took place between 1837 and 1843. And there were at least 23 massacres in southern Dja Dja Wurrung country. The Aboriginal protectorates were set up. The arable land was subdivided from the 1860s, gold mining from the 1840. Then the Forest Commission ruled public land to the 1970s until the Land Conservation Council was established. And so we've had about 4 decades of reserve management. Just to put it in context, when I was born, white people have been in the landscape for 112 years. You know, it's that recent. And if you want to get it really recent, Ivy Sampson, who was Ivy Denali, who was born in 1899, that was Thomas Denali's daughter. Thomas was removed from Mount Franklin Protectorate as a boy in the 1860s. Ivy died in 1984. So a boy is removed from a protectorate. His mother died in 1984. That's how recent it is. Sorry, his daughter died in 1984, just 3 generations. And yet we've even forgotten where the protectorate was. Or we've deliberately forgotten, or it's just better out of mind. Quick photo of the 6 peaks. That's Mount Cruikshank, a drone shot. That's Mount Beckwith, the granite country, Yananock. That's Mount Greenock, which is a geological reserve. That's a rock well on Mount Tarrangou, looking back towards where I live. That is one of the 20 granite quarries on Mount Alexander. And if you wonder where the 8-hour day monument comes from, it's from this quarry, where the big obelisk for Robert O'Hara Burke's memorial, that's where the rock comes from. Almost all the granite in the Melbourne Cemetery comes from these quarries on Mount Alexander. And a bit of recent artwork. And this is a drone shot of Mount Franklin with a road going into the crater. And there's a lovely little, as part of the research, I've actually discovered another subsidiary crater that hasn't been recorded, just here. And that's only 110,000 years old. That's Mount Cruikshank and that's what it looked like this morning when I went riding down to Clunes, exactly like that, with the cloud on top. And behind here is an Aboriginal ceremonial site, which I'll show you in a sec. These are the LiDAR images of the mountains in the landscape. This is Mount Cruikshank, and I'll show you the Aboriginal ceremonial site, which is here. But I live here. And so each of those peaks, they're so distinctive. I call them soft serve ice creams. They are volcanoes, and they stand out on LiDAR beautifully because basically LiDAR undresses the landscape, even takes the water out of that, Jan. That's Hepburn Lagoon. We live just here. So that's taken the water out. I've got a friend who's got a double-storey house. He took the house away and I could see their cellar. It's an amazing tool. Sorry about the quality of that image, but I've mapped 30 Aboriginal oven mounds in that ring around Mount Cruikshank, and the Aboriginal ceremonial site is right there. But I don't put them on the map. I just say they are in this area because we don't want people going there. They're recorded Aboriginal sites. So I put a dot and said they're within that white line. And I believe, based on the evidence, that people were coming to do ceremony here and they were living semi-permanently in this landscape. Not on the mountain, but around the mountain in an arc. In 1840, John Hepburn showed George Robinson, Chief Protector of Aborigines, a small plain where the natives usually camped, being a favourite place for natives. These are my words now. Just 2 lifetimes ago, dozens of Dja Dja Wurrung women collected moonyon under these same trees, camped around still intact oven mounds. I knew that they were there because I went to George Robinson's diary. I followed what he said. 4 miles north of John Hepburn, I went to the landholders. They said, no, there's nothing in the landscape. So I said, do you mind if we go and have a look? On Anzac Day 4 years ago, I parked the car here and I walked across. I walked around the paddock, gave up, and then fell down a rabbit burrow. The rabbits love oven mounds. I'd stumbled on the first one I'd found. It's the most magnificent oven mound just over here. I'll show you a photograph. I think that's what an oven mound looks like with the rabbit burrows in it. And the rocks that are in it were used for the cooking, like hangi like the Maori people did. In the landscape I live in, the basalt rocks were used for cooking. In the landscape I was born in northern Dja Dja Wurrung country, the ones I mapped as a teenager, there was no rocks, so they made their own. They baked clay, and they put clay balls in the oven. And so there's clay balls in, and the soil is really dark, and the rabbits love it. And that oven hasn't been fired up for 183 years, and it's still there. And the farmer doesn't know it's there, and the guy that owns it still hasn't found it, because he drives around in his ute. He doesn't walk around and fall down the road bar. Anyway, but if you know what you're looking for, they're still here. And so the trees that are there are the same ones that were there 183 years ago when Robinson described them. The same trees. The other method we've used to identify more oven mounds was to go back to 1890s geological maps. And this is an 1890s geological map where the geologist actually marked the ovens. But no one has gone to the geological map and looked at them. And the guy that owns this paddock, Greg Stewart's dad, didn't even know it was there. It's on the fence line, and it's still there, if you know what you're looking for. So using these geological maps to locate them has been really, really, really useful. There's the landscape from near the top of Crucian. You'll see two rings, 75 metres across. That's the Aboriginal ceremonial site on the top of the hill next to Mount Crucian. And there it is up a bit closer with the cows. Still there. And that was recorded very early on. And now people are conducting ceremony on that with the support of the landowner. So there's some good stories. So that's what I've concluded after looking at Mount Crucian. There's a really important ceremonial rings. I talk about them in the book. There's the Oven Mound Cluster, which I talk about in the book. And I'm arguing this is a priceless cultural landscape. It's privately owned, largely unknown and poorly recorded. And I'm saying it's time to acknowledge and celebrate this and other legacies. The other mountain, how am I doing for time? I can see it up the back.
Yeah, we've got about 20 more minutes.
Yeah, but I want to give time for questions.
Yes, you do.
This is Mount Franklin. You can see Mount Tarrangou in the background. So Mount Tarrangou is one of the mountains I looked at. So is Mount Franklin, obviously. I'll jump over that one. That's what the mountain looked like in the 1860s when Aboriginal people, that you can see in the foreground, were still on that site. After the protectorate finished, and they were on land that Edward Parker was given, and they were moved to Corranderk in 1864, and then they were moved to Lake Tyers. So the people who lived from Dja Dja Wurrung country were moved 4 times before 1912. This is Mount Franklin. This is the modern burial ground, and this is the Aboriginal burial ground within the Franklin Ford Cemetery. It's a cemetery within a cemetery. It's a protectorate cemetery within a modern cemetery, with Edward Parker's, the assistant protector and his family, and a few other gravestones. So there are lots of things still in the landscape. What I've done, I've gone back to the maps that were in the Crown files. I've looked at how, over the years, I'll just go back to this one. I knew I'll put that in for a reason. That's Mount Franklin. That's the only bit of public land that's left. You'll notice that the corners have been eaten out of it. I went back and looked in the Crown file and I found petitions from people saying, we shouldn't take this bit, and we shouldn't take this bit, we shouldn't take this bit. But over the years, the whole area just got reduced to about 167 acres. That's all that's left of this mountain in public ownership. There's a petition I found in the Crown Files of over 150 local people saying this area is really special. It should never be touched. This was a petition for the 1870s. Fast forward. That's me and my family visiting. That's Jan. Sorry, Jan. No, I found this in the South Australian State Library, and people used to go up there and just go into the crater and enjoy Mount Franklin. This is 1908. By 1944, the Victorian Railways, this is a Victorian Railways photograph, they'd planted out much of the area to pine trees. And I found the whole sorry saga of how it came to be like this. Basically, the Forest Commission said, we're not going to plant the top so you won't destroy the view. We're not going to plant up to the ridge. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do this. And everything will be fine. They completely ignored the agreement and they planted the whole thing out to pines. Now the pines have got a heritage overlay because they're regarded as heritage. It's just really, really, really strange. The good news is that now that Parks Victoria is in partnership with the Dja Dja Wurrung people, they've just said we want the pines gone. And so they're just taking them out. So there's some great things about joint management, which enables things to happen much more quickly than they would if it was just Parks Victoria. This is another thing I talk about in the book, where I'm talking about the way the springs were destroyed. And this was a letter in the 1860s to the Castlemaine paper, and it says this is one of the finest springs in the colony, will not be sold but be preserved in perpetuity forever in the public good. Such a spring of itself is enough to supply Castlemaine with water. This is what it looks like today. It's owned by a Melbourne property developer. It's grazed by horses and cows. And he won't let anybody go into it, even though it's public land. He leases it for $60 a year. There's a whole range of stuff that you find when you go into the Crown Files, and you can see all the correspondence and how it came to be like this. Mount Franklin, by the way, is just in the background there. But these are some of the things I talk about in the book. That one didn't come out, I won't. That's what the crater looked like in the 1870s, with two old dudes sitting on a log, another guy here, and there was a stone tower on top. So we've been able to reconstruct what it was like over the years. And that's where they planted the pine trees, and I found a map and we've documented how it all happened, and that's what it looks like today. Yep. And that's the crater today. That same view. That's exactly the same view as that. And in the Crown File, the forester says, wouldn't it be an interesting experiment if we planted the whole thing out in exotics? 1948. That's how it happened. That's the fire tower on the top of Mount Franklin. Not a great thing to go up to the top and look at. Not only that, it's now dangerous because the RF transmitters for the mobile phone towers, when the fire guy goes through it, he's subject to radiation, walking through the radiation to get into the fire tower. And the pine trees are so high you can't see from the fire tower either. You know, if you wanted to design a stupid piece of, it's sort of like something out of Utopia. So we've told that story in the book. It's a nice story. So these are and I won't tell you the whole story about the Mount Franklin mineral spring, but that's a great story. Everywhere I go in the world, in Australia, there's a bottle of Mount Franklin mineral water. It doesn't come from Mount Franklin. But in summary, Coca-Cola had rights to a spring that they renamed. They drilled 8 holes. They didn't put the casing in properly, and they destroyed the spring. Before they left, they changed the name of the spring from Limestone Spring to Mount Franklin. And that's where they got the word Mount Franklin from the spring that Coca-Cola destroyed. I wrote to Coca-Cola and said, can you give me, this is my story, what do you reckon? And they said, oh, we can't find anything. They couldn't even tell me how they chose the name of Franklin. So I've gone back through the history and reminded them this is what happened. So at the end of the book, I pull it all together and I say, okay, as a historian, let's look at a deep time perspective, look at what happened pre-contact, look what happened during what I'm calling the unsettling era. Let's look what happened during the mining and quarrying era. Let's look what happened in the Forest Commission era, and let's look at what happened present day. 10 minutes, thank you, I'm nearly there. And so I make statements at the end that pulls it all together. And I basically say all of those things, and the last chapter is, they're the themes that I pull together. Because I was sitting on all this stuff, and it seemed like a good idea to pull it all together. So that was the way I did it. That's the book. Oh, Clive does come out. No. The version Clive had dropped out for technical reasons. Clive's name wasn't big enough, and I said, let's make it bigger. And yeah, I was going to apologise for Clive not being there, but I don't know whether he wanted that to be bigger than that or not. But I wanted to be same size as me, but Clive likes sitting in the background. But he's been very valuable. He's a great friend. That's the view from the top of Mount Beckworth, Nananook. And can I just acknowledge the great work that Jay did on if you'd been designing the book cover, you would have done an even better job than that. Seriously. I loved what you did when I saw it. I thought, that's beautiful.
Thank you.
Great bit of work. So that's it. Any questions? Yes.
I'm just wondering, are there any depictions of the ovens in use?
Are there?
Any depictions or photos or anything?
Okay. If you go to one of the books that was identified by the library as worth having a read, one of them is by Paul Hoare, and it's called Footprints Across the Loddon Plains. And he and his children have actually experimented with ovens using the methods described in the literature. And he's got pictures of doing the oven in 2015. That's him doing the oven with his kids. He's not an Aboriginal man. But we've got descriptions of how they were used, quite detailed descriptions about how they were used, and all the stuff was raked out and fire was put in it, and then the rocks were chucked in, and then it was raked out and the rocks were put back in and the food's put in and the brass is put over the top. But he's actually tried doing it. He just said, well, if this is how it worked, let's do it. And there are photographs in there, so there are descriptions, yeah. But it's very similar to the way the Hungy stuff is done in I mean, everybody probably knows what a Hungy is, and yet we don't know about our own landscape, which is really, and a lot of farmers don't even know what the ovens are. And they're in their paddocks.
No, they looked at that photograph you had with the rabbit burrows. That looked quite enormous. Looked about half the size of this room.
It's about half the size of this room.